Good evening.
How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
All right.
It's warm in here, it's cold outside, so you're in the right place.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's good to see you all. My name is Peter Blackmer. I'm a research fellow with the Detroit Equity Action Lab. Co-sponsors the Detroiter Speak series with semesters in Detroit. To introduce the General Baker Institute, I'm going to invite up Carolyn Baker and the rest of the crew from GBI.
All right. And then live.
And the rest of you, Ann, they got their own Carlos. Right there.
Hi everyone.
Hey.
Do I need a mic?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming to the GBI. I'm sure y'all are kind of tired of hearing people talk. You've been at this course for what? 3 weeks? 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so this is the space. It's called the General Baker Institute. Carolyn and Val and a bunch of other people have been working really hard to get this thing going. You should have seen this place when we started. There was actually like a baptismal, like little pool on the side where we would like baptize people into the revolution, but Carolyn didn't like that, so we had to get it out of here. Maybe when you walked in, there was like a cross in the front. We're gonna keep that. That's actually our thing here, and definitely. But yeah, like the space has transformed a lot in the last couple of months, and a lot of it has been done by Carolyn, just getting people to work. So like, let's give Carolyn a big hand for that. All right, so this is the General Baker Institute. We are here because we're focusing on one of the pillars of the reason why we created this space, and it's political education.
That's right.
The reason why we think we deserve political education, and we need political education, is because Dr. King talked about that you couldn't prescribe the drug or the cure to something if you don't give people the right diagnosis of what's going on.
That's right.
Right? So we need to understand what is going on in our country, what is the political climate in this country, but also what is the political state of the world for us to be able to do things a little bit better. We also have other pillars that I'm hoping some other members will be able to talk about. So the other pillar is...
Internationalism. We have to understand that our struggles here are tied to other struggles around the world. We not just thinking that if we win here, we win, but it's other struggles we need to be that are deeply impacted by what's going on here and vice versa.
Hey everybody, my name is Jasenia, and the other pillar is art and culture. So we're really trying to not just talk political education, but let that also become known through the senses, whether it's musically or visually. So kind of incorporating those things to keep our spirit of the revolution and the spirit of struggle alive.
Hey everybody, my name is Gavin. The last pillar is projects of survival. So on top of politically educating and understanding what's going on in the world, we also have to recognize that working class, poor and dispossessed people need to come together collectively for their own survival, and that often the most important political education happens in that collective process. So not only learning together, but also working, building, and living together.
Oh, and we're a print shop. We are a print shop.
We are a print shop.
We are a print shop.
Yeah.
If anybody asks you, anybody are a print shop.
This is a print shop. This is the General Baker Institute print shop.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know, you know your father better than I do. Yeah. But I'm sure Jen would have been super happy to see all of y'all here.
Yep.
And sort of seeing that his vision and everything that he has worked for, as well as his whole family and all of us that are here have worked for, is slowly manifesting into something. So we're glad that y'all are here, that y'all are studying, that you're learning, that you're communicating and meeting more people. But we're also hoping that you all can come back and do some art with us in the near future. We're hoping that you all can be part of that working class incubation that we are trying to create in this space and help us build this space a little bit more. So we hope to see you guys and you people walk through these doors again very soon. So thank you.
Don't forget
again for
about
coming.
us. Yeah, come back.
Carol, you want to have Sunday class? Sunday class session?
Yeah.
So Sunday we start our political education classes. The series is called A People's History of Detroit, and it kicks off this Sunday, and it'll be right here from 2 to 4. And the first class is General Baker, Evolution of a Revolutionary. So everyone's welcome. We have others. It's a whole series, a whole bunch of classes in this series. So it's every Sunday from 2 to 4.
All right now.
All right. Thank you.
One more time for Carolyn, Carlos, Justina, and Gavin.
All right.
Before we get started, we have one more announcement to make. Liv from...
Hi, I'm Liv. I'm here because of Michigan Student Power Network. If you are a student in the state of Michigan, it can be any school, and you want to get paid $350 a month to do organizing on your campus, let me know. There's an application. They'll pay you to do organizing work, and you get connected to a statewide group of folks that are working on leftist work. It's, for the most part, we try to be working on like racial justice, but people do a wide range of things. I also just want to say, I'll leave these out there, but these are voter primary candidate report cards that we made. On the front is what we rated people on, and on the back is why. And then there's also these stickers, when nothing goes right, go left, and disrupt, vote, disrupt. So yeah, have a good one.
All right.
All right, thank you, Liv. Tonight's session, we're going to be talking about Black power and politics in Detroit. So before I introduce our speakers for tonight, I want us to start off the same kind of way that we did last session, which is turning to a neighbor, hopefully someone that you haven't spoken with before, and discuss for about 5 minutes these two questions that are going to start to prime our conversation for the evening. So the first question being, why do people run for political office? And the second being, what can you do when elected officials don't address your needs or fight for your interests? All right, so we'll take about 5 minutes, turn to somebody next to you, again, hopefully somebody that you don't know, discuss, and then we'll come back together. Pull it back together here. I know we could talk about these kinds of questions just about all night, and I'm hoping that by meeting some other folks, we can continue these conversations afterwards, but in the interest of time, we're gonna keep it moving. So I'm, rather than like last week, when I tried to run around and give the mic to everyone, I'm hoping that we can show some hands to respond to the first question, and I'll just call you out, and you can hopefully elevate your voice a little bit so everyone can hear you. All right, so in your conversations about the first question, why do people run for office, what were some things that came up in conversation?
So one thing we were talking about is people could run for personal reasons, like expanding their influence of power, or they could do it because they want to impact social change, and they believe that political office is the tool to help them.
Okay. Thank you. So, two things: personal power and impacting social change. The two can sometimes be closely related. Who else wants to share what came up in the conversation? Yeah.
Can't hear you.
Maybe stand up. Stand up.
We also talked about how like a kind of contrasting motivation is either to like reverse change or maintain a status quo.
Thank you. One more? People are bashful tonight, all right.
We talked about how it's overall to push some sort of agenda, whether it be good or bad, because we live in an almost oligarchical society, it usually comes along with the same group of people pushing the same elite agenda.
Thank you. Right, so we're hearing a lot of different perspectives about the reasons why we are understanding in our society that people seek political power, why people run for political office. So from there, with the second question, what can you do or what have you done, you can speak from personal experience here as well, when elected officials don't address your needs or fight for your interests?
You have to be militant, boots on the ground. I mean, a big part of having a government is the people actively taking interest in it. And if they're not listening to you, then you have to go stand outside of the office and push it whatever means necessary. Because the purpose of a government is to meet the people's needs. And if it's not doing that, it's the hell with it.
Thank you. Right. So the outside game, right? Different approaches. I think it's telling that the first response that came up was not vote, right? Not to say that that's not a strategy.
I often give this example of what happens when you are upset because elected officials don't fight for your interests. And through the years, it becomes clear that the elected officials define what you should do. And I can just see when folks were in a concentration camp and didn't like what the Nazis were doing. And somebody said, well, why don't we pull together a petition? And we signed our names to it. There are 30,000 signatures, and we handed that over to the Gestapo. And then I always ask the question, how did that work out for you? They define what we should do when we don't like what they're doing. So we have to get involved in petitions. And of course, you have to have 186 million signatures in 3 weeks. All of these kinds of things. You don't like what we're doing? Wait till the next election and vote us out and all those kinds of things. But never lose sight of the fact elected officials define what we should do if we don't like what they're doing.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in?
Well, on October 15th of 1965, when I was a student in Ann Arbor, we sat in at the draft board, 40 of us. And Police Chief Krasny came and he said, you are now in violation of Ann Arbor Ordinance 62.357. If you don't leave, we're going to arrest you for trespass. And we saying we shall overcome. And they put one cop on each arm and one cop on each leg and carried us out. When we went in there, it was just us. When we came out, they had a paddy wagon from the Washington County Sheriff and thousands of people outside. They were holding them like that. And well, we ended up taking it through the courts and making some legal arguments, like the United States is a signatory to the Nuremberg Treaty, which says that it's a citizen's duty and responsibility to effectively protest the illegal actions of their government. And the reason that we had that treaty was because the Nazis were saying we are only following orders. Yeah, that's no longer defense. You have a duty to effectively protest the illegal actions of the government. Well, they wouldn't hear it. They said it was a political issue. But we made the argument and made people think, and we said that just like the students who sat in at the lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina, that their trespass convictions were overturned because they were protesting an illegal law. Separate but equal, so should ours, because we're protesting an illegal war, and we had done everything. We had petitioned the government, we had marched, we had done all these things, and our only recourse was civil disobedience, just like their recourse was civil disobedience. Can you hear me? Yeah.
All right.
So that's what we did, civil disobedience. That was one way we were protesting.
All right. We're at three different perspectives. Neither one of those three involve voting. Right? Again, I think that's telling, considering what we understand our relationship is to power structures, to electoral politics. And what we're going to talk about tonight really draws upon a lot of things that have been shared already. Right? The need for the people to define what their own interests are. Right? To assess people in power about how they relate to the interests and the needs of the people, And then if they are deemed to not be in alignment with the needs of the people, what strategies, what tactics, and what kind of campaigns need to be waged to get the people who are in political office to fall in line with the people. Before I bring up our speakers for the night, I want to give us a crash course to really frame the kind of conversation we're going to be having, because primarily we're going to be speaking about the relationship between electoral politics, black power, and civil rights, particularly in the 1960s onward. But we can't really have that conversation without understanding the longer historical context of this question. So this is by no means expansive. This is a really crass and abbreviated timeline. But I don't want us to enter into this conversation starting from the point of black political power in the 1950s and 1960s. I want us to put that in a longer historical context. So when we talk about the history of the United States, and particularly struggles for black political power, I want to ground this within the give and take, the push and pull, and the ways that systems respond to challenges. So when we talk about the Reconstruction era, we see a rapid rise of black elected officials, particularly in the South. However, during Reconstruction, there is a bloody and excruciatingly violent backlash against the gains that are being made for free men and free women in the South and throughout the nation. So by the end of the decade, there's really only, I think, one elected official who's remaining from the Reconstruction era, who is George Henry White out of North Carolina, who says that during the era of Reconstruction, so between 1865 and 1877, that 50,000 African Americans had been murdered, right, in an explicit political repression to subvert the country back to the days of the antebellum era. So moving forward at a really rapid pace, from the 1900s, early 1900s to the 1960s, the Great Migrations is a response to this kind of violence that's taking place in the South. And the Great Migrations lead to increased density of black electoral power in the urban North. So during this period, we see a rising black political representation in the urban North. We see Chicago, New York, and Detroit became hubs for black political organizing. So in Chicago, Oscar DePriest has a political machine. In New York, we see the election of Adam Clayton Powell to Congress. In Detroit, Charles Diggs is elected to Congress, and John Conyers as well. So at the same time that we're seeing these kinds of gains being eked out in the urban North, we're also seeing the active suppression of voting rights and political activity in the South that's been continuing since Reconstruction. So with the 1950s, the civil rights movement in the South is struggling for voting rights, struggling for electoral representation. All the while, this is still an ongoing struggle in the North as well. So in the 1950s and 1960s, as the civil rights movement is generating momentum, black voters begin to elect Democratic mayors who are promising to address their needs. Right, so whether that's in Detroit with Kavanaugh, whether that's in Newark, New Jersey, in cities that are having a rising black population, black voting bases are responsible for getting white mayors elected who are deemed to be progressive, who are Democratic mayors, even in nonpartisan races, with the promise that they will act in the interest of black voting base that got them elected in large part. So in response to these organizing campaigns in this electoral process, it quickly becomes apparent that these white mayors have lied. They have no intention of actually delivering on the promises during the campaign season. Does this sound familiar? So in response to that, people develop a more radical critique of electoral politics, understanding that white representation in City Hall and City Council is insufficient for meeting the needs of black communities. So, as the 1960s progress, the civil rights movement is evolving. In responding to material conditions in the urban North, there is this move towards increased focus on self-determination. What And so Byron Rustin is categorizing this as an evolution from protest to politics by the mid-60s. James and Grace Lee Boggs are theorizing about this in the essay, The City is the Black Man's Land. And what we're talking about here is this struggle for control of the political, social, and economic institutions within major cities that are increasingly lurking towards a black majority population. So this is also at the same time we need to think about one of the pillars here, internationalism. This is during the era where there is revolutionary independence movements on the African continent, right? In South America, this is a global era of revolution, that this is part of the context of this moment. So during this era as well, there's kind of an inside-outside game approach to electoral politics. So there's a lot of communities that are still organizing within the Democratic Party at this time to influence electoral politics from the inside out. There are people who are organizing independent political parties, so the Freedom Now Party. There's also a number of other independent parties throughout the country that are seeking to seize political power through still electoral politics, but through creating an independent party in recognition that the two majority parties were insufficient for meeting the needs of the people. And so from 1964 to 1968, in response to the limitations of liberalism to actually address the needs of the people, and in many cases actively repressing the voices, the movements, the mobilizations of black communities, there's a wave of urban rebellions in sweep American cities, from Harlem to Watts, and all points in between. And at the same time, there's an ongoing trend of disinvestment, deindustrialization, retrenchment, and backlash against black communities that are trying to assert self-determination in these cities. So really what we see by the end of the 1960s is the emergence of a new direction in black politics as communities organize and leverage the political capital that was developed in response to the rebellions to elect black mayors in many of these cities. So I wanted to include some from Michigan here too, so we saw that the influence that Southeast Michigan had and representation that Southeast Michigan had during this era. So in 1966, Floyd McCree is elected in Flint. 1967, Richard Hatcher is elected in Gary. 1967, Carl Stokes is elected as the mayor of Cleveland and is widely recognized as being the first black mayor of a major American city. In 1967 as well, John Burton is elected mayor in Ypsilanti. 1970, Ken Gibson is elected in Newark. 73, of course, Coleman A. Young is elected in Detroit. And the same year, Maynard Jackson is elected in Atlanta. Each of these campaigns have their own stories and are worthy of further study. So I would encourage you to go on the Semester in Detroit website, or if you just Google Detroiters Speak, and there's going to be a whole lot of resources that are available there to learn more about this era. So in 1970, there's this growing recognition that local struggles for political power are insufficient to need the scope of white supremacy and of structural racism in the United States. So in 1970, the Congressional Black Caucus is formed as a way of coalescing black elected officials in the U.S. Congress. And in 1972, there's a National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, which brings together radical thinkers, organizers, and elected officials to chart a direction and agenda for black electoral politics and black liberation. So that's a breakneck crash course to kind of give us some context for where we're going to go tonight. And from there, I want to give us some questions for consideration. We by no means are going to address all of these tonight, but to get us thinking as we move forward as well. What were some of the guiding analyses and impacts of independent and third parties in Detroit politics during the Civil Rights Movement? What roles did electoral politics play in political education processes and grassroots organizing during the Civil Rights Movement? How did electoral politics fit within the evolving political theory and praxis of organizations during the Black Power movement? Right, so was electoral politics seen as a goal in and of itself, or an end in itself, or was it a strategy, was it a tactic in the service of achieving black liberation? Right, these are the questions that we can explore. What did it take to elect Coleman Young as Detroit's first black mayor, and how did his election impact black freedom struggles in the city? How did black communities organize for national political influence and power during the National Black Convention movement during the early 1970s? And what are the lessons and legacies of this era of political organizing? What have been some key successes and shortcomings of seeking civil rights, human rights, and self-determination through electoral politics? How did local, national, and international political and economic trends impact Detroit during Coleman Young's 20 years in office? Right, so it's insufficient to develop an analysis about Coleman Young's administration without locating it within broader context nationally and internationally. What influences did these histories have on the emergence and analyses of the Committee for the Political Resurrection of Detroit? Right, little known chapter in the city's history in the late 90s, early 2000s. Do elected officials in Detroit currently represent the best interests of the people? And lastly, what lessons can young organizers learn about the possibilities and limitations of organizing for political power and social transformation through independent or mainstream political parties? So each of these questions is fairly heady and complex in and of itself, so I hope that we can spend some time individually or collectively in community really diving into all the complexities and considerations that each of these deserve. And so we'll make sure that those go up online as well. So that was a lot. I'm going to stop talking now and bring up our speakers who have much more wisdom than I have to share. We're really fortunate tonight to have three legendary organizers in the city of Detroit here to impart a whole wealth of knowledge upon us and to engage us in really critical dialogue. First, I want to welcome up Marion Kramer Baker. Mama Marion is a veteran organizer with roots in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She's the president of the National Welfare Rights Union, a member of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, and a member of the People's Water Board. Mama Marion was an organizer of the Congress for Racial Equality in Louisiana during the Civil Rights Movement before moving to Detroit in 1965, where she got involved with the West Central Organization and the National Welfare Rights Organization. Mama Marion is also an organizer in Detroit's revolutionary union movements, including the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, alongside her late husband, General Baker. Let's give it up. So Mama Marion's decades of struggles for human rights and economic justice has included labor organizing, tenant organizing, welfare rights organizing, and more recently is a leading organizer in the ongoing struggles for water affordability and against water shutoffs in Detroit, Highland Park, and beyond. Right. So let's give it up for Marion Kramer Baker. Oh, I'm gonna bring everybody up. Dr. Charles Simmons and Reverend Sandra Simmons are co-founders of the Hush House Black Community Museum and Leadership Training Institute for Human Rights in Detroit. Professor Simmons is a professor emeritus of journalism and law at Eastern Michigan University and an adjunct professor in the master's program of social justice at Marygrove. He served on the faculty at Howard University in Washington, D.C., California State University in Los Angeles, and was a visiting professor at Wayne State University in Detroit. Professor Simmons is a graduate of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and Georgetown Law School. His commitment to service as a human rights change agent spans over 50 years, dating back to his days with the radical student organization Uhuru, who I'm hoping he'll talk a little bit about tonight with us. As a journalist based at the United Nations in New York City, Professor Simmons was appointed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as the United Nations and international correspondent for Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which was originally organized by Minister Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. His journalism spans the field of U.S. foreign policy, from the Cuban Revolution and Paris peace talks on Vietnam to covering stories on anti-apartheid, liberation movements in Africa, and the long struggle for peace in the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Professor Charles Simmons. Bob Wayne Curtis is unable to join us tonight. He sends his regrets, but I'm hoping that he will be able to join us later this session because he has a lot of wisdom to share with us as well. And last but not least, Maureen Taylor is a lifelong soldier in the war against the poor. Born and raised in Detroit, she has served as state chair of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization since 1993 and was elected treasurer of the National Welfare Rights Union in 1994. She earned a bachelor's degree in social work from Marygrove in 83 and a master's degree in social work from Wayne State in 94. Ms. Taylor represents public assistance recipients in Michigan Department of Health and Human Services offices over case disputes. And along with other welfare rights members, she conducts local and state DHS policy trainings and works with elected officials and program administrators to draft policies and procedures that protect poor and low-income families. Since 2002, Michigan Welfare Rights has worked with thousands of concerned residents and organizations to stop water, gas, and electricity shutoffs for thousands of low-income households in Detroit and Highland Park. She has testified before Detroit City Council, in the Michigan State Capitol, before members of Congress and the federal administrations on the plight of poor people, especially as safety net programs are removed without education or employment opportunities for low-income families. So, please join me in giving it up for Maureen Taylor. As long-winded as I can be with the introductions, those don't even that's not even a drop in the bucket from the amount of experience that's represented in these three chairs here. So we're very fortunate tonight to have these three legendary organizers here with us.
All right. You want me to turn it up?
All right, so we're going to start off with Professor Simmons.
Good evening, brothers and sisters, family. It's really an honor for me to be here and to see so many young people who are interested in social justice. And I use the term social justice in a very broad way. That includes all the different struggles against the empire at every level. Mm-hmm. I want to pause and just remind ourselves of wherever we're sitting and standing on this continent, in this hemisphere, is that we're standing on land that was stolen and upon which genocide was conducted on millions and millions and millions of people from North, Central, South America. And also to remember those who were enslaved in this hemisphere and our ancestors. And we think about all of these in these last days of Black History Month. And so I'm honored, and I feel like this is a very sacred space because General Baker was just a brother to me. We grew up in the political struggle since we just turned 21, I think, when we met. And for the rest of our lives, we were very close friends and comrades. So this, all of the labor that has gone into constructing a center for social justice and peace, local and global, in this space for me is a very sacred honor. I can't even express words. I don't have the words to express what I'm feeling about being in here, and then sitting with my sisters here who have been in the struggle all their lives for people who are the least of these. And lifting them up, and just the tremendous sacrifice that has gone on among the people here in Detroit who have struggled and continue to struggle. We have to just pay homage to that. I'm 78, I'll be 79 this year, and I think General and I about the same age. And I think about, we were born at the time that the United States entered the what they call World War II, which was the second imperialist war of the last century, where the various empires got together to divide up the planet among themselves, continuing on from the first imperialist war of World War I. And we were children of the great migration of African Americans to the north. And when we talk about political and electoral politics, those didn't exist at all in the 1940s. And I'll give you a story briefly, I hope, about a particular experience I had as a child. I was I think it was around 1947, I'm guessing, but I was very young. And many of us of that generation would go back to visit our families in the South annually or regularly, back to the farms and rural areas that we came from, that our grandparents and ancestors come from. My grandfather, and I lived at the time with my grandparents, my grandmother was a hardcore social justice activist, Annie Maybelle Wright from Georgia. And she taught Negro history, what they call it at the time, in the church. And she was an activist within the context of the Baptist Women's Auxiliary. And these women were the descendants of the colored women's club movements of the 1800s. And that included women like Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and all those types of fighters that we are standing on the shoulders of today. My grandfather, on the other hand, was a trade union activist in the United Auto Workers prior to them becoming legal. They didn't become legal until 1941. But before that, and even in the early days of the union, there was a lot of bloodshed. The companies hired gangsters to assassinate the union leaders. And so my grandfather was one of the militants. He wasn't a high-ranking person in the union, but he was a very dedicated and a very proud worker. And he was from the farm in Georgia. So he was proud of being both a former farmer and of being a worker. Now today, the politicians talk about the middle class. But at that time, we talked about the working class. And we're very proud to be a part of the working class in Detroit. But we went on a trip to Georgia, which was where both of their families were from. And it was myself, my older sister, Mildred, who was about 3 years older than me. There were 2 carloads of it. There was another car that, there was a minister, a young man who I suppose was probably about 30 years old. Now, because of the struggles that the men had with the union, between the companies, I said they had the gangsters to assassinate or beat them up. The men who I was around in my grandfather's, among his peers, they were all packing all the time. And now that was a Southern tradition also for people to have weapons. I mean, they went hunting, but they had pistols and a lot of guns. We had a lot of guns in the house, but it wasn't, we didn't think of it as of a political struggle, but it was for self-defense also. And so so both of our cars had guns in them. And the 2 men, my grandfather and the other man who I said was a preacher, they were packing. And I know it because I saw when my grandfather got dressed, he would always put on his gun. I mean, that was just part of his clothes. So we were driving through these 2-lane highways going all the way to there was no big highways like you have now. And we couldn't stop at a motel. There was no such thing as black people going to white motels. So we had to plan to drive the entire route and have enough food and everything, so you could make it to the next place where they had an African American community. And they had it figured out so you could go and get something like a bed and breakfast within the African American community from a home. And they would put you up like we have bed and breakfasts now. But you couldn't go into a white area. Now, when we talk about electoral politics, nobody had the vote in these communities among black people. So that wasn't even thought of at the time, except there was a struggle to get it. Now, we stopped at a roadside restaurant. It was a combination gas station restaurant in a little dusty village, very poor area. And so I knew, because my grandparents had taught me about segregation and about the history of the oppression of Southern in the South. So it wasn't unknown to me. But I woke up from my nap in the drive, and I looked up, and we were in front of this restaurant and gas station, and nobody was in the car but me. And I assumed that they had gone into the restaurant in front of me. I didn't think about the segregation at that moment. I was still half asleep. So I went and opened the door of this restaurant. I didn't step in. I just opened the door and looked in. And there were tables, there was sawdust on the floor, tables of white men who were very poor white folks, very poor. And a young white woman who was standing over here at the semi-kitchen. And they all froze when I opened the door and looked in. And if looks could kill, I wouldn't be here now. I have never seen so much hatred. I mean, I could feel it in my spirit as an 8-year-old. The anger and the lust for death, because there were lynchings. Lynchings were common during that period. Now, we think about fascism and what happened with the Holocaust. We have experienced the Holocaust in this country from day one, from the time of Columbus, and it has been consistent. The men looked at me, and nobody moved. I mean, it was just like frozen in time for a second. And I saw that, and I backed out. I didn't step in, and I just closed the door and backed out, and I went back to the car, and my folks were there by that time, and they were asking me, well, how come I had gone into this place? Within a few minutes, the sheriff drove up. Now, I'm talking about a stereotypical Southern sheriff that you've seen in these movies, with the big belly, the suspenders, the great big hat, the corn cob, I mean, all of that, and a pistol hanging down the side. There, and his assistant, who was a smaller person but had the same stereotype. And they came because I had opened the door to this place. Now, think about this issue of democracy today. We never experienced democracy. So when we talk about democracy, I always say that's something foreign to me. I don't know what that is other than I've read about it, but I haven't seen it in practice. So for America to talk about democracy, it does not exist as far as I'm concerned. It didn't exist then, it doesn't exist now. Now, when the sheriff drove up, my family was still standing up outside of the car, getting ready to get in. And we saw the sheriff come and everybody stopped. And my family, the men were standing on one side, and they were watching the sheriff and his guy walk around our cars, just inspecting it. They saw we were from the north. And that was a challenge, but it also was generally, they didn't lynch people coming from the north, generally speaking, because they didn't want the publicity. Now, it wasn't that they would have any, I mean, they wouldn't go to jail, definitely. There was a moment, probably, maybe it was 2 or 3 minutes, but it seemed like hours. They walked around the car, and then my grandfather said, "Is there a problem?" He asked the sheriff. And the sheriff ignored it, and he continued walking around the car. He kicked the tires and looked. And then he went and he said, "No problem." And he got back into the car, and then they drove off. Now, I was thinking, my grandmother was standing there, and she knew, she was a Southern woman, and she knew my grandfather. He was a person who would not take no shit. He wouldn't start anything, but he wasn't going to back up. And neither was this other man. And they were carrying, and we had guns in the car, and the sheriff, they had guns. So it could have been a massacre right there. Everybody would have been killed. But for God, I mean, this was something that was just averted. But that happened many, many times. It wasn't just my family. It wasn't just that one day. This was happening thousands and thousands of times every year throughout this history, going from the time of the end of the enslavement period all the way up, probably through the 1960s. So when we're talking about what we're struggling against today, don't be surprised by Trump. The political struggle that has evolved into Trump was illogical. There were none of the political figures that we're talking, the presidents that preceded Trump have been for working people or poor people, people of color, for women, for gay people. None of them have. So don't be surprised by his antics. Of course, he's bizarre and he's totally disrespectful. He's a Nazi and all that. But he is an American United States product. He didn't just arise out of thin air. Those folks have been there all the time. And although they have been quiet in some places, they were never quiet in the South. In the South, Trump would have fit in perfectly. When I remember politicians, they used to talk about niggers in the campaign. That was common language. I remember the Democratic campaigns with Harry Truman and all those who followed him. But they were never for us. So there were some who were a little bit for workers, because workers were organizing and they had votes. So they paid attention to that. But the unions discriminated against people of color and blacks and women just like the corporations did. So eventually, we saw the beginning of some unions like the UAW beginning to integrate. But that was a major struggle. So we have been dying in the streets and the country, and then in the 1950s we had the Emmett Till case that got a lot of publicity. Now let me tell you, the Emmett Till case, where a 14-year-old boy who was our age at the time went to Mississippi. In case you're not familiar with that, he went to Mississippi to visit his family, and they said he whistled at a white woman, and then her family came and took him away and lynched him, threw him in the Natchez River. I met his mother at King Solomon Baptist Church shortly after that, because she went on a national, she had a great deal of courage. She refused to close that casket. She traveled around the United States to talk about that lynching and what was happening in general to black people. But I found out from a couple of journalists recently who had been there to revisit that case. And do you know where they dug up his body out of the river? There were numerous bodies there already. But those people were from the South, so they didn't get any publicity. The only reason Emmett Till was known is because he was from Chicago. But the lynchings were normal, and it was considered a part of democracy. Remember that. So when Americans talk about democracy, they're basing it on what they learned about the Greeks and the Romans. They had slaves, and they called it democracy. So let's be very careful when you hear people talking about democracy. It doesn't mean me and folks like us. Mary asked me to talk about our youth experience. I'm writing a book now about a particular experience we had in 1964 in our youth organization, which General Baker was a part. And I learned today that John Watson and the daughter is here, and he was one of our and a member of our organization. Uhuru was started in 1963 by maybe a dozen folks your age. At Wayne State, we started at Wayne State University. All of us were members at Wayne, students at Wayne. General, in fact, was at Highland Park College at that time and working. And that was something that was unique among our youth at Wayne at that time. We were both factory workers and students. So we were totally familiar with the auto industry as participants in the labor force. So we organized to take on the empire as 20-year-olds. We're going to not only take on all of this racial discrimination and oppression and exploitation, but we understood the global connection of American imperialism that was causing many of the problems around the world at the time. The wars, they didn't just start. And so we wanted to, with our handful of young people, we believed that we could take on all of this.
That's right.
And we did something. One of the things that we did, we were invited to go to Cuba in 1964 to challenge the State Department travel ban and to find out what socialism was based on the Cuban Revolution that was very young. The revolution took place in 1959, so it was only 4 or 5 years old. Now, we knew by reading the press that the government, the media, the corporate media lied about black people consistently. In fact, in many papers around the United States, there was only one day, if we were lucky, for the corporate media, which we call the white media, the white newspapers. You had Negro news or colored news on one page once a week, and that was sports and crime. We have more pages now, but the substance hadn't changed. So we knew they were lying about what was happening in the United States about us, but we didn't know what was happening exactly internationally. And so we wanted to take that trip, and I wanted in particular, we wanted to find out what was happening to black people in Cuba. We knew that Cuba had been a major slave trade center also. Excuse me. Yeah, we got a letter from a group from University of Michigan that had been the previous year. And the purpose of the letter was to say that the trip is canceled. It was a secret trip. Secret because we knew the FBI and the CIA knew we were going, but we didn't want them to know the particulars, how and where and when. So we went to Chicago, and from Chicago, somebody met us in the street, and they said, we're going to Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, we met some more people. And then we went to Paris. We chartered a plane in Paris to Czechoslovakia. In Czechoslovakia, we got a Cuban plane that could only land in Ireland and Newfoundland and in Havana. Why was it so difficult to go 90 miles in the United States? The lies that they did not want us to know the truth about what was happening in Cuba. And today, they don't want us to know about what's happening in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Afghanistan, China, anywhere. And they have been very successful in keeping the Americans ignorant about what's happening in the world and the connection between the global struggles and the local struggles. In Cuba, we were amazed to see that a poor little country, well, at that time they had about 7 million people, could transform a colonial country colonized by the United States. That they could house and feed and clothe their people and educate them as a poor country and they were beginning to fight against the racism. That's still a fight, but they at least made a beginning. And I was so shocked by that experience. It was a overwhelmingly beautiful, loving experience to see what little people did to challenge the empire and then to welcome other people to reach out and support other people around the world with their little resources. Jumping way ahead, Hurricane Katrina, the Cubans had about 1,500 medical people sitting in the airport ready to come to the United States to help the people in New Orleans. Your president wouldn't let them come and said they were communists. But this is an example of what Cubans do normally around the world. Their medical system is probably the best in the world in terms of supporting poor people. There is no, and I've done a lot of traveling, and there's no place, if you go to the desert, as far as you go in the desert, in the mountains, the jungle, you're gonna run into a Cuban doctor. And they're mostly women. And so we were just perplexed. How can this little country do all this when we can't do this in the rich United States? When we couldn't house and clothe and feed and educate people, and we still can't. I can't, but we won't. And so we learned a lot, and it inspired us then and now to persevere with changing this country. Because that's something that nobody else can do. We have the advantage of being inside the belly of the beast. And that's an advantage that nobody else has. No matter how successful their struggles are, they can't get inside and make the changes that we can make. Our organization was one of many. Now we started, I believe, around the same time as the Black Panther Party did. I think they started in '65, I'm not sure. But there was mutual inspiration when we learned about other organizations around the country that were fighting for justice among young people, and we tried to reach out and support, give moral support. We didn't have any financial resources we could give. We were mentored by other older people who had there was one particular organization, the Group on Advanced Leadership, which had many names that are very important you may not have heard of, but they supported us and gave us some guidance, although we didn't pay attention because they were old folks. They were over 30, you see. And so we know that history had passed them by, and we were the ones who were making history now. So we were very arrogant, we were very in your face, we were confrontational, we didn't care about embarrassing anybody, we just raised hell. And it had some effect because the youth organization that we were involved in, we studied a lot. And I can't overemphasize the need to study. You got to study political education. You got to study about the struggles that are going on around the United States and all around the world. The revolutionary struggles, the struggles within the context of imperialism, the electoral politics, politics outside of the electoral, you got to study all of them to see what you can learn to apply here and now, because each generation has new challenges, and you've got to redefine what your particular mission is as a young person. But keep in mind that it is youth, globally and locally, who are on the front lines of history, of making changes in countries, dealing with oppression and injustice of every type, all around the world. It's young people who are on the front line. I want to be on the front line, but I got to think, where's my medicine? Where's the doctor's office? And so, I can't get somewhere. And I told Dave when he invited me to come, I said, well, tell him I got to be first because I go to bed before the chickens. So if the revolution happens after 9 o'clock, I'll miss it. But I want to be able to give you the encouragement. Maybe you can't learn anything from what, my theory or practice, but I just want to encourage you to struggle for justice in any field that you're in. But you got to study, you got to learn. Mao used to have a statement in China, if he who has made no scientific study or investigation has no right to speak. But you've got to study, and it's a lifetime thing. So we think about General Baker and the advances, the way that he was able to inspire and organize. General studied constantly. We always had books in our hands, and we were debating the books and arguing about them and almost fighting about the issues. But we were passionate about this new information, this new struggle. How are they able to achieve this? And there's no limit to what you can do. You see, you think about, we're dealing with monsters, but we can fight these monsters. And also, for those of you who have a faith orientation, that's very important. For me, the faith orientation was something that when you saw no way you could find, we made a way out of no way. And that's something that we learned from our ancestors. We were fortunate enough because we from the beginning, because we were in working class families that were in industry and we worked in the factories, we always had a desire to make some changes in the factory system because the factories are so brutally oppressive and dangerous. And they gave black folks the worst jobs, the dirty jobs, where it was too hot, nobody else would go in there. We had to go and clean up the foundry. And so although we were up north, we got better pay. in Detroit, we got enough money to buy a house and a car. So that was a tremendous benefit coming for a person coming from the farm as a peasant, basically. And in one generation, we made the transition from being a peasant to being, not even a generation, maybe even 10 years, from being a peasant to being a member of the working class who had a decent amount of money, but the working conditions were brutal. Many people didn't live to get a retirement. We didn't know anything about the environmental issues at that time. So there are always new issues appearing. So now you've got to deal with the climate change. You know, you've got to deal with all sorts of medical issues. You've got to deal with the new technology, intelligent information and all that stuff. And all those new changes, you would think that that's going to improve the workers' situation, but it's not. The new technology always seems to reduce the quality of life of working people to dire poverty conditions. And then it raises the level of wealth of the rich people. So I'm going to stop there and let my sisters persevere and share with their ideas with you. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Charles has given a foundational representation of the discussion that we were asked to engage this evening. And I want to say just a few words about black power and politics. But first, I was born in Detroit. I don't know nothing about this, okay? Ain't nobody followed me nowhere. If anything, I followed folks. I don't know nothing about this here. You know, and white people looking at me funny, don't know nothing about nothing like that. I was born and raised on the Lower East Side of the city of Detroit in the area called Black Bottom. One of my best friends, I went to Catholic school, and Andrew Walagora was one of my road dogs. I'd ride down the street. Andrew was Polish. I'd get to his house and knock on the door and ask his mother, "Is Andrew ready?" She said, "Yes, Maureen." I go around the side of the house. Andrew would come out, open the door, and say, "Maureen, you want some punch keys or something like that?" Of course. So then get the food, and me and Andrew walked on. We went a little further. Vincent Chiarino was Italian. We go to Vincent's house, knock on the door. Miss Chiarino, is Vincent ready? "Yes, Maureen." Me and Andrew walk around the side. They had Italian spaghetti, all kinds of extra sweets with stuff on it that you'd kill a rat for. It was so good. And we get all that. And we buy, we see you, and we walk down the street. And these were my road dogs for years. I didn't understand that there should have been a problem, because nobody mentioned that to me. Maureen, Andrew, and Vincent walked to St. Elizabeth's for years, and once we got to McDougal and Gratiot, where we had to get the bus, we didn't get on the bus. We took the money we had and went in a little restaurant and bought some hamburgers and a bunch of pickles on it and continued to walk. I thought that's the way everybody lived. Who knew? So you ate all of these traditional foods from other people's countries, and I thought this is the best way in the whole world for Americans to live. And that's where I lived, on McDougal. I was out of high school before it came to me that folks might look at me kind of funny. And I didn't understand it, and I read the history. I knew everything about what might have been going on and things that were happening at a later date. My mom worked for Michigan Bell. That's what it was called at the time. My dad started in the factory, but he went to the post office. And if you know anything about African Americans, government jobs was the best thing in the world. So that good job, benefits and all of that. So Dad went there. I had parties in my house, and my friends looked like the Rainbow Coalition. And it was time to go home. My dad would go and put on Ravel's Bolero, which was supposed to make everybody go home. And we just continued to dance and waltz until my father said, that's enough, get out. So for the longest time, I was a child of the American working class that looked like you all look. See, I don't know nothing about this here. And I had to learn, because it became clear to me when my dad, I got an older sister and a baby sister, and my father at some point said, Maureen, you and the girls, I don't want you all to go south. Well, why, Daddy? I just don't want you to go south. And he had a look in his eye. Okay, I never said anything else about it. He took us on a vacation from Detroit all the way across something called Route 66. Y'all don't know what that is. And we went to all of these different places and saw grain and smelled pigs and saw cows, and the chicken farms were the nastiest thing I ever saw in my life. But there was so much food, I couldn't understand why there were people hungry. And I knew something was wrong, something wasn't working. We go all the way across the country, all the way to California, and going south, and we went to Mexico and saw my first bullfight. Saw all of that. Bull is, you know, the matadors and everything is involved, and they grabbed the bull, and he didn't make it, and they pulled the bull out. And me and my sister, we would go up to the top of the stadium and look over, and there's the bull being drug out, and you look at his blood and everything. It was horrible. 10, 15 minutes later, a guy comes out with a cart, and he says, hamburgers. What is this about? So we started to learn. You connect the dots. You know, the bull's dead, the bad boy that got cut up, he done took him in the back, and a few minutes later, here comes a guy with a cart talking about hamburgers, fresh. Okay, so you start to learn. And then we go back through Albuquerque and Tucumcari. But we get to Texas, and Dad turns left. Well, why aren't you going? He said, because we don't want to go through southern states. And the next place we have to go is some places that I don't want you to see. I never said anything else about it. I don't recall that he said anything else about it, but he was trying to tell me that there was danger involved with Mississippi. Dangers involved with Georgia. Dangers involved with some of those other places. And I was already starting to be radicalized. I was radicalized when they took me across. The following summer, we went north to a place called Quebec. And Daddy threw coins up in the air. And little white children came from everywhere to pick up quarters. What's this about? And it was clear to me that there's something going on this question of color. Something going on about this question of color and how people are treated. But it's also something going on about class. There's something going on about the way poor folks seem to be the same. The little Mexican children on the borders, and I saw that, and they're out there with little signs, and 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds with little aprons on, and I thought, this is horrible. Then you go to Quebec, and it's all white children, look the same. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds trying to get a handful of pennies. Went to another place, it was all African Americans. Looked just the same, trying to scrounge, trying to find a way to get a couple of pennies. And I thought, okay, there's a message being sent to me. I'm not sure that I have it all, but I started to connect the dots. Then there came a period of time, sometime later, where I heard about the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. What are they talking about? And I met Jen. And I met Jen because I was on the top of Highland Park Community College, throwing rocks down. I was mad because we didn't have a black agenda in the school. I was up there throwing boulders. And Jen said, what are you doing? I said, oh, this is wrong. Jen said, come down here because you don't even know what the hell you're doing. I didn't. I came down and started talking to people, and they let me come in and started talking to folks, and I started to learn there is something going on here and I don't quite get it. Later on, I came across a situation where I couldn't eat. My household was poor, we didn't have a job. And I met Marion. And I knew I had met her earlier. Contacted her, said, listen, there's some problems in my household. I don't have enough food to eat. And we're about to be put out. Marion said, meet me at the welfare office. I did. That's the Linden office, it's closed now. I went to that Linden office and I met Marion there. She talked to the lady. This was, she didn't have any food to eat, and the lady said something smart. Marion said, okay. In those days, they had manuals, and manuals on the desk. Marion picked up the manual and threw it, hit the lady in the chest. I thought, damn, she's crazy. What the hell's going on here? Within seconds, workers were running, people were hollering, all kind of folks came out there. They bought me an application, they filled it all out, told me to sign right here, snatched that damn thing before I could read it. Within an hour, I had food stamps, I had money for lights and gas, I had rent to be paid. I think she got me a car rental money, I ain't gonna ask for that. I had all kinds of stuff. And it occurred to me, she not frightening nobody, she no bigger than me. What is it about what she knows and who she is that made all this occur? I mean, the whole office was in an uproar. But I got everything I needed because this little midget right here said something, meant something, and through that manual, it hit that woman and all hell broke loose in the office. They told me I don't think I had to go back there anymore. They told me, just call in. Anything you need, just call us. Just don't come back up here no more. Now, I give those examples of whatnot because as chair of welfare rights, I've had to learn, and I learned it a long time ago with these wonderful folks here, but it was clear to me, race is always the best tool used in the United States of America. If they can get you fighting on the basis of the color of your skin, they're good. They can go all the way. It is clear to me that the way you got Ebola is Africans was having sex with monkeys. That's all you had to say. And then, oh, well, we all believe that. It's clear to me that the drug cartel started because you got South Americans that absolutely send their kids into drug activities. And that's where it all started. Miami Vice. You got all that. That's where that stuff starts. And all of you never met a Canadian that was not a dope head. All the Canadians, that's all they do is smoke weed and whatever else. And you got all these stereotypes. Every Middle Eastern person got a first cousin that's a terrorist. There's no question about that. Jewish people, you cannot get along with them because they're sneaky. And if you say the only good Indian is a dead Indian, and you say it often enough, people might start to believe it. What does a welfare recipient look like? Fat, black, greasy looking, got 10 or 12 kids by 12 or 13 men. The math don't even make no sense, The math doesn't even work. But if you continue that, and continue that, and continue that, the new virus we got now, where did it start? It's probably the Chinese people that did it by, not by chance. It's probably they did it on purpose. I hear it. That's how this shit starts. If they can divide us on the question of ethnicity, color, gender, gay people, I'm a Methodist, and in my church, we got to fight about whether or not gay people got a place in the Methodist church. What the hell is that? Gay people can't believe in God? What is this? Division. Black politics, black power. First time I ever knew anything about it and heard it was Stokely Carmichael screaming it out on the television set. And it was a way to talk about inclusion. Black folks had to be involved in something. And the same thing, Mary and I talked about it earlier today. Black Lives Matter, that's only a nuance, that's only an advanced thinking. Black folks' lives are important too, because at the end of the day, all lives matter, all of them. If we get to that point where Muhammad taught talks about making the Hajj to Mecca. You can't even go to Mecca now. Clothes, diseases. Here come the stereotypes. But when Malcolm X went there, by the time he came back, he was changed, and he wasn't the same person anymore. You can't make these decisions about who you form relationships with based on the color of the skin. You have to dig a little bit deeper. That's the message I want to leave you with this evening. I'm not the scary type. I'm really cleaning up my language tonight because I have a much more colorful presentation that I usually deal with. But I'm going to say this to you. Charles is right. Marion's going to say the same thing in just a few minutes. I can live anywhere. I'm hardcore. I can live out on the streets. I got friends. I can go all over the country. The Pope called me and say, I'm going to send you a ticket and your son to come all the way to Rome so you can tell me about this water mess. I can go anywhere. But there's something wrong in this country. There's something desperate in this country. You can't hardly pay to go to school. You can't hardly pay to live in whatever apartment you got, if you got one. You want to leave, but you got to live in mama's house because you can't afford nothing else. There's something wrong. And the fix is with you. Now, Charles is right. Can't run the way we used to run. I got a knee brace on right now. But I can tell you, you want a dog in a fight, you call me. You call me. I can be the nice and the best Methodist you ever seen. But you want a dog in a fight to scare everybody, you call me and watch the kind of language I can give you to make the other side change their mind. I'm going to end with this. One of my favorites is Star Trek. Everybody knows that. And I really like Jean-Luc Picard. He was one of my favorites. And I remember before Jean-Luc, we had Captain Kirk and we had Spock. And it came a time when Spock was getting, he was about to die. He touched something he shouldn't have touched, and he's standing on the glass, and he's leaning this way, and death is right on top of him, and Kirk finds out, oh my goodness, and runs down to where he is, and Kirk is on one side of the glass, and Spock is on the other side of the glass, and they kind of leaning on each other, and Spock says inimitable words. When I heard it, I knew it was the theme. He said, Jim, no matter what, I'll always be your friend, and don't ever forget that the needs of the many always must outweigh the needs of the few or the one. My name is Maureen Taylor. I serve as state chairperson of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, and I thank you for your attention.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow those two. But I'm glad to be here again. I enjoyed you last week, and I'm going to enjoy you tonight. But before we proceed, Maureen and Charles and I are fortunate enough that a lot of our members are still alive. We might be dragging. I think I'm about the youngest one. We might be dragging along. We might have sticks and what have you. I always tell them I'm the youngest and I know I'm the oldest. But we do have Watson, stand up. She can't hear me. What is it now?
Where'd she go?
This child was born in the struggle. And I want y'all to talk to her when you get here. That's John Watson and Edna Watson at the time. Her name's been changed. One of the children. All right, always. All right, then we have, who else was here? Gracie Wooten, why are you always hiding? All right, stand up. Gracie Wooten was one of the women in the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Gracie Wooten was the person that found this building and said, let's go over there and check that place out. And we've been here ever since Gracie brought us here. We somehow, at one time, this place, what was the name of this place? I done forgot. Maze Printing. Used to call us to come back them up on some of their printing. Thank you, Gracie. Chuck Wooten. Gracie's husband was Jen Ace Cooten Boone, one of them. Chuck Wooten. Both of them were part of the league and on the board. Alonzo, stand up. Alonzo was from what? Elrum. They were something else when they came into the League of Revolutionary. In fact, before that, we were different ROMs. Before we decided, the women decided. We got sick and tired of just putting that paper out and putting the papers out at the plants and all that type of stuff. And we decided to have a little strike one time. Because we were the ones, if you ever see the movie, Finally Got My News, how my dues is being used, we sitting up there, we drinking a little wine, and we putting that paper out. But we decided that, look, we got to get better than this. And a big meeting was finally held because they saw that we wasn't going to do nothing until we get some unity in there. The women were the backbones, I'll give you that. Now, they were workers themselves. And people didn't know it. But we would be out there because we knew we needed a better place. See, I came from the South, just like Charles. And real quickly, I'm going to breeze through my little brief history. I came out of the Civil Rights Movement at the end of it. I had been in the Civil Rights Movement. I left Southern University. And I went and joined the Civil Rights Movement down in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My mother had got us in the movement when I was young, when we was living in Dallas, Texas. How did we get to Dallas, Texas from Louisiana? My grandfather was told by his little old boss, who was young enough to be his grandchild, that if he messed up again, he was going to get fired or something like that. And then my grandfather said, and the next time, he ended up, my grandfather was sweeping or something like that, and he called himself bad enough to hit him. This was a young man, right across the street from our house. And my grandfather stabbed him. Not enough to kill him, because he could have killed him. Like you said, they had pistols and knives on them all the time because you never knew where you were going to end up. And my family on both sides, my father and my mother's side, came together at our house on Atchafalaya Street in West Baton Rouge, which is Port Allen, the port, and decided to get us out of there. They removed my grandfather, my father and all of them got him to Dallas, Texas, where an extension of our family was, because we came from big families. And a year and a half later, 4 children, my mother and my grandfather and my grandfather and a truck. They came, my grandfather and 2 other cousins came in there and got us out of Port Allen. The other part of the family was crying, they didn't like that, but we had to make sure they could not get my grandfather. And we lived in Dallas for a long time. I still have family in Dallas. I still have a huge family, a huge family in Baton Rouge. Huge. Really huge. That's why I didn't want to marry nobody from there, because I was afraid to. You never know. I went to Southern University, a couple people hit on me, and I found out they were my cousins. I said, back it up. Can't mess with your aunt. Back it up. Hey, dead cat is right. How many dead cats on the tree? But on the other hand, we knew, even in Louisiana, we were fighting, and most of my cousins were expelled from Southern University for demonstrating. And they could not go to any college in the state of Louisiana because they took a stand against what was happening, that LSU was getting the best and our school was getting the leftovers. So those are the type of environments I came up in. I joined the Civil Rights Movement, and that was not, That was no easy thing to be in. Yes, we got trained. We got trained to know how to fall. We got trained. They trained us on how to go door to door and all that type of stuff. They train us. Look, you might get arrested, and this is what you need to know. But when you hit those highways, and you're in the car, and you got to be back in Baton Rouge somewhere, and the Klans come on you better have. We were trained that you better have your best drivers. And you better stay calm and begin to ride. And that was the many times we had to face that. The Klans knew us and we knew them. But you know who saved us? A lot of people on the road, on the way back to where we had to get to. And we had a priest that used to hide us and then let us go in the morning time. And I'll never forget, he always had Coca-Colas waiting on us. And I hate Coca-Colas today. But on the other hand, this man was a part of the civil rights movement. We had, and when I got thrown in jail in Jonesboro, Louisiana, with some other folks, they put the blacks together, they put the whites together. Two of the guys that were whites got beaten up badly, and we could hear them, but we couldn't do nothing because we were in separate cages, as I call them. We made noise. But it was that guy that was there to watch over us at nighttime, but to clean up the place, he and his wife, that would bring us a message. And they were white. But you know what he told me? I was in solitary confinement. I don't know why, but I was in solitary confinement. They said I was one of the leaders. But anyway, he said, Marion, don't say nothing. Tell the rest of them don't say nothing, but I'm gonna get you some soap, and I'm gonna let y'all get some showers. But please don't say nothing, because see, I'm on your side because I feel that you're not only fighting for blacks, you're fighting for us also. That's right. And you know, he made it because we kept our mouths shut. But we were in jails 8 days and 1 day before we could get out. And they had knocked out the windows, so if any bugs or anything wanted to come down, you in Louisiana, it's hot as hell. I had to sleep under a wool blanket to keep the mosquitoes from eating me up. But no, that just gave us more determination to go further. I finally got up here. I said, oh, I'm going to the promised land. You know, they said the north is the place to be. The promised land. And I had to come up here because, you know, I had a bug that bit me and fell in love in the civil rights movement. And of all things, I knew nothing about the miscegenation law. You know what that is? Oh, what is it?
Wait till you hear this.
Wait, what is the miscegenation law?
I should remember.
That's all right. That's all right. Meaning I fell in love with someone that was white. And we could not get married in the South. If so, you go to prison. So we came up here, and my ex-husband was a person that was a designer at one time for Ford Motor Company, but he left Ford Motor Company because he could not tolerate what he had been seeing on TV. And doing that, he gave up his job eventually. He said, because I'm going to stay in this movement. We came up here, got involved with several places that was being taken by the city of Detroit to remove them out where Wayne State could have the property. We got involved in that, and we were part of WCO West Central Organization. A guy by the name of Howard King family was also a part of this, and they were not only terrorizing the community where they had beaten up Howard and some of the other students over there from playing baseball and football in the street on Butternut Street, but they terrorized Howard and the other youth for years to break down the unity that they had over there on Butternut Street off of Trumbull. But it was WCO that stepped in when they tried to go after Howard. And I was learning at that time organizing. I had learned a lot from the civil rights movement. I began to learn another type of organizing. And that was at WCO, West Central Organization, a Linsky's type organization. And I learned how to talk against Saul Alinsky too, that's another story. But at the same time, we were able to save Howard Jr. from the police. Because the police was the same police. One of them was the same police that killed Malice Green. And that was years ago. And these police were getting away with that type of terrorism in that neighborhood. But the organizing was different than what I had done in the South. We had to go talk to the Teamsters and tell them, you live in this neighborhood, you're going to be a part of you got to be a part of WCO. We're pulling the people together against the tyranny and oppression from the city, and they're not coming out and beginning to understand that they were taking people's houses by saying, look, we have changed what your area should be able to be, and gave it to Wayne State. Wayne State became our enemy. I know at one time, myself and some priests and some more ministers and stuff like that, and people from the community, we were facing 7 years in the federal penitentiary because of Wayne State. If it wasn't for lawyers like Goodman, the old man Goodman that's dead, and some more lawyers, because lawyers was learning how to fight based on what we had to do. We told them, and I learned this part from welfare rights. You learn the law. We'll give you the strategy, tactics, how we're going to win. And that's how we go to court today. We have to work together as a collective on how we're going to move on these problems. I want to finish because I could go on and on and on. I think what Maureen stopped on, and as well as what Charles told to you, the fight is in your hand. That's right. You might think because you're white, black, a certain black or something like that. This is not the 1960s, but they're using some of the same tactics. For that knucklehead to be in the White House and doing and saying what he's saying, a lot of that stuff is fascism. I lived under fascism in the South. People say, no, I said, come on, I'm going to take you for a ride and let you see what it means to live under fascism when you can't walk down the same damn street on the sidewalk that a white person was on. You had to go to the shore in the back door and go upstairs and something. I think, well, I'm glad I'm living going upstairs and looking down on them. But you better not throw nothing down there. They could all, I mean, it was terrible. We didn't have schools like they had schools. They had indoor schooling. And they had, and when I say indoor, I'm talking about what was happening down there. They had toilets inside. As a little child in the first grade, I had to go out to the outhouse to go to school. When I went to Dallas, that was the first time I was able to be able to go to a toilet inside. But these tools were being used and abused for the benefit of keeping the class divided. So when I hooked up with that General Baker and Gladden Didell, now have you ever heard of Gladden Didell? Y'all look him up. Gladden was a man that ended up, he was a part of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, but Gladden was in prison, and Gladden painted his way out of prison. His pictures and stuff like that are beautiful. But I used used to have to keep WCO open at nighttime where we could print up the leaflets for the drum. I had to teach Glenn and General how to run the Gestetner machine. Who know what a Gestetner machine is? Oh, you know. Okay. So, you know, they be saying to me, why are you out so late? I said, you wouldn't have gotten the offices if I wasn't here. You know, but I learned from them. I learned from the civil rights movement. I learned from what my grandfather used to tell me all the time when I go back home. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Someone in this family have to continue this fight. You keep on. My mother was that type of person. You know, because, you know, I'm fighting for a better society for you. I won't be here too long. Well, I'm just a mere 65 years old. I won't be here. We won't be here too long. But at the same time, we would like to lay this to you. Everybody in here, and I told you last week, is a leader. And you cannot put yourself over the next person. You have to work in a collective. If you see a brother, sister having problem trying to get through a class, help them with it. Kelvin, get out of here. I see you out here. That's my child. That's one of my children. If you see that, then therefore it's up to you to take the next step and see what you're going to do in this election. We got to erase the folks in D.C., be they Democrats or Republicans, but at the same time, we got to pick our fight. We got to remove that main one, 45, and his vice president there. Then we go after the Democrats, because they're just as worse as they are. It takes strategy and for you to get there, but to get the strategy, you got to learn what your strategy and tactics going to be. And we'll be around. We love to do it, work under your leadership. Thank you for having us, and we'll be out there when you need us.
Can we give one more round of applause to Lauren Taylor, Aaron Baker, and Charles Simmons? Is everyone clear? Is everyone leaving this space tonight clear on what's being asked of you? Yes. Are we clear? Because we heard a lot tonight. We heard a word from each of these people, each of these luminaries and legendary organizers, and we've each been given a task in a lot of different ways. We're over time. I want to ask one question. If I could ask you to respond to it very briefly. What's it going to take to organize and challenge this empire from within the belly of the beast?
I'll start first. What has to happen is we have to identify the goals. Do we deserve affordable housing? Yes. Do we deserve health care? Yes. Do we deserve the environment to be free of poisons in the water and poisons in the air? If you want to live and die of old age in your bed when you're 106, find out how to make that happen. All I want you, what was the question?
What's it going to take to challenge this empire from the inside?
Young folks like this. And along with that, like I said again, don't throw us out. Because I was there one time where you were sitting in the sense and used to look at folks and say, oh, Bill, I can't work with those folks. Those old folks don't know what they're talking about. But we got the history. And we got the strategy and tactics of all this, that you should not have to fall into the well that we had to fall into to learn all this stuff. So it's up to you.
I think that one of the weaknesses in our struggles is that we have so many good grassroots organizations in Detroit and around the state, but we're not working with each other enough. And we have to build some unity among we got a dozen environmental groups, for example. we all have to work together. Even if you're going to have a separate organization, we got to work together, at least conceptually, so we're on the same page in our struggles. Some people think that because I'm working in housing and you working for transportation or employment, those are separate struggles, but they're not. All of these struggles are linked. And so we have to work together, and we don't have enough unity in Michigan. We have to spread social justice throughout the state. The white folks upstate, and other people of color upstate, they all have the same problems that we got in Detroit. They're all exploited and oppressed, but because of the white supremacy trick that they have imposed on us, that has been keeping us apart. But we got to find a way, in spite of the racism, to work together throughout the state, because we've got to take over the legislature in Michigan as well as in many of the other states. The other thing I would like to leave with you is that we have to, this thing about patriotism, we have to think of ourselves as loyal to this Mother Earth, the planet. We are citizens of this planet first.
That's right.
We're not going to fight for one country against another country. That's not in our interest. That's in the interest of the Wall Street gangsters. But our interest is to build unity and peace. And that's a major struggle, and they don't want us to have peace. They want us to be fighting among ourselves all the time so they can keep the power. But you have the power. You just have to exercise it.
Thank you. One more round of applause, please. Maureen Taylor, Mary Baker, and Charles Simmons. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We're over time. I encourage you to...
3 weeks from now, back at the Commons.
Yes, 3 weeks from now. We're off for 2 weeks after this session. Wayne State and University of Michigan are both on spring break. So we'll be in 3 weeks back at the Cass Corridor Commons. And just a reminder, again, Carolyn raised this earlier, Sunday, 2 p.m., back here at the GBI for the first in the People's History of Detroit Political Education Series. So thank you all. Get home safe. Stay warm.